House I grew up in was haunted, so these are my experiences of when I was growing up in a house so blatantly haunted my friends only ever stayed over once. For context, the house was raised so we had garage and basically storage under the living space at ground level, so no animals walking on the ground and making noise in the house stuff. We had the footsteps walking down the hall when there was only me in the house, the pantry door being open every morning. Dad would be up at like 4 a.m. to get ready for work and it would be open, so he'd close it and blamed it on me for some time. Okay, so on to the more wild stuff. I was hanging out with a mate of mine and we made our way back to my place, and I realized I didn't have a key, so I asked him to just wait at the front door and I'd go to the back door. We never bothered to lock the back door because we had a Neo-Mastiff. So I went around back, walked up the stairs and opened the door into the kitchen, and directly in front of me was the T-intersecting hallway and a shadow projected onto the wall. It was standing full height from the floor, and as I moved it didn't. So I froze, and as my mind was processing what I was seeing, it turned and bolted towards the living room and front door, and I heard and felt the footfalls. So in that moment my mind shifted from shadow to intruder and I run after it, like 2 meters across the kitchen and about 3 to the living room, and I remember my friend was at the door waiting for me, so I just make for the door and realized there was nobody around. I opened the door and told my friend there might be someone hiding right here, so help me check. We found nothing. I have 2 younger sisters, and once I was watching TV with one of them in the living room and decided I had enough and was going to bed, so got up, said goodnight, started walking to my room, and at the end of the hall was a young girl in white PJs, and I just thought it was the youngest sister and gave it no more thought. For about 3 more steps till I reached her doorway, and she was sitting there playing a Naruto game on the old PS2. That's when I looked back up the hall and it was empty. I remember muttering, "Damn it, Bob." At this point we had long since started calling the ghost Bob just so we had something to call it. The fated friends night over. So not much happened for most of the night, till we decided that it was bedtime. We were 19 at the time. Anyway, it was the following morning when I got up and went to the living room where my mate had slept, and he looked like hell. Our lights had an afterglow function, so you could see for a few minutes after turning them off. Well, apparently about an hour after I'd buggered off to bed, the lights clicked twice and the blue glow kicked on, and that stirred him awake, thinking one of us was up. Then the front door started rattling in the frame like someone was outside pushing and pulling on it. That eventually stopped, and not long after he heard the footsteps going from the door down the hall and back for some time. He said he pulled the blanket up over his head when the door started banging and wasn't brave enough to pull it down to see what was walking around. He flatly refused to stay a single night ever again in that house. The little girl I mentioned earlier down the hall, that was the first time I had seen her, but it wasn't the last time. The veranda on that house ran the length from front to back, and I was talking to the elder of my sisters while sitting out there one night when I felt vibrations under my feet. They felt like light footfalls that anyone who's lived in a raised or 2-story house for any time could identify. At first I thought they belonged to the youngest sister, and again I was wrong. It took a few moments before I realized I could also hear them behind me, and the elder sister's eyes had gone wide and no longer looked at me. So I turned and looked to the far end of the veranda, and there she was standing at the handrail down the far end, looking down into the yard. I looked at my sister in surprise and looked back, but she was gone. We later found out that a little girl drowned in an above-ground swimming pool that her family had. So that was probably her. So this one is the only time I felt true fear in that house. We all generally slept with our bedroom doors closed, but this night was a nice temperature, so we had the bedroom doors open. It was just me and Dad home as the rest of the family was out west for a festival. And in the middle of the night I was awoken by a door slamming shut, and as I rolled over to go back to sleep I heard the footsteps in the hallway. At first I thought it was Dad, but he always had a light step, especially at night. These were not even slightly light, and coming from the wrong direction, so I figured Bob was making a late-night journey down the hall. Except once the steps reached my door, they paused and then started into my room. This was the first and last time the steps deviated on their path. I was still facing the door and could see no one, and the footsteps continued all the way to the edge of my bed. My eyes must have resembled dinner plates in the darkness, but I couldn't see anything standing by my bed. Then I noticed the sound of breathing. I know it wasn't mine, because I'd stopped breathing and my heart was treating my rib cage like a speed bag. After a few moments I managed to calm myself a bit and muttered out, "God damn it, Bob," and rolled over to face the wall. This was a mistake. Because the next thing I felt was a weight settling onto my bed, followed by the lifting of my blanket and the feeling of someone crawling under it and laying down. I laid there in fear for what felt like hours before exhaustion took me to sleep. This is just a snapshot of the shenanigans that we experienced in that house, but they are also the most memorable.